Schwarzort, Juodkrante. The Ludvikas Reza Culture Center, where we are now, is located in the old Juodkrante school. This typical German school was built at the beginning of the 20th century, and the first school on the Kronenspit was also in Juodkrante. The old name of the settlement, Schwarzort, was first mentioned in historical sources in the early 15th century, in 1429, as a village paying taxes to the order. Juodkrante is the only settlement in Neringa that crosses the main road. It begins at kilometer 18 of the Smiltene-Nidder road and is located closest to the sea, because it is the narrowest of all the settlements in Neringa. The sea is just 1.5 kilometers away along the paths of ancient forest, where centuries-old trees grow on high parabolic dunes with deep valleys between them. Will anyone find your footprints 1,000 years from now, my blossoming fatherland, where my songs sound? But after all, sad place, I will always love you. I have been carrying every lost tree in my soul till now. Once upon a time, in my chaste childhood, I too took my first steps with my mother and father by the hand. Here they will rest, and I feel their love from the other side. Written by Martynas Ludvikas Gediminas Reza. Is there any other place in the world so wonderful that we would call it the Sahara of the North? It is an inimitable creation, a miracle of nature created thousands of years ago by retreating glaciers on the coast of what is now the Baltic Sea. On numerous occasions, houses, churches, and even entire villages were swallowed up by a sea of uncontrollable sand, but the people would just move to another place and start all over again. Juodkrante, surrounded by the ancient forest, was the only settlement to withstand the sand attacks. The waters that wash either side of the narrow stretch of Kronenspit sand create a truly unique atmosphere. When you enter Juodkrante, you feel the coolness of the Kronian lagoon penetrating through your clothes with your entire body. In 1807, Queen Louise of Prussia, severely ill with typhus, spent the night in the old school building, the current Ludvikas Reza Culture Center, on the way to Klaipėda, and King Frederick William III slept at the post office. Many famous representatives of the European culture elite have visited Juodkrante, including French philosopher Denis Diderot, an Austrian neuropathologist, psychiatrist, psychologist, and founding father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. Philosopher and writer Jean-Paul Sartre visited Neringa in 1965, and a royal family visited again in 2015. Only this time it was King Carl XVI Gustav and Queen Sylvia of Sweden. The Queen was fascinated by the landscape and wanted to stay overnight, but unfortunately there were no apartments suitable for royalty in all of Neringa. Neringa, and especially Juodkrante, is closely knit with Martynas Ludvikas Gediminas Reza, born 1776 and died 1840. He was the last famous representative of East Prussian Lithuanian culture, and made the last major effort to resist Germanization and preserve the nation's spiritual values embodied in the work of Donelaitis, folklore and ancient Lithuanian script. At the same time, he was the living link that connected the intensifying Lithuanian cultural life of the early 19th century with the traditions of East Prussian Lithuanian culture. An intermediary between Königsberg and Vilnius. We also remember Ludvikas Reza as a unifier of Lithuanian culture, who disregarded the barriers of state and confession, and built a bridge between Lithuanians living on the opposite banks of the Nemunas. In Reza's words, Prussian Lithuania and Russian Lithuania. Reza was a Lithuanian professor, so he was a respected authority among Lithuanian cultural figures. Personal contacts were maintained with him, and his works immediately spread throughout Lithuania. where they were relied upon and learned from. Reza's influence was also enhanced by the fact that his name was enveloped by the halo of world-famous people: Immanuel Kant, Wilhelm von Humboldt, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and Adam Mickiewicz. It was through him that the world learned of the existence of the seasons, metai, the masterpiece of early Lithuanian poetry by Kristijonas Donelaitis, that he published and translated into German, and that the nation itself was still alive. Reza marks the boundary between the two spiritual cultures of the Lithuanian people: the old, mostly religious culture, and the new, secular one. He himself was a clergyman and professor of theology who translated the Bible and was interested in religious Lithuanian writing. But he also cared about secular affairs. Reza admired belles lettres and wrote poetry himself. He is deservedly considered the pioneer of Lithuanian folklore studies. He was the first to systematically collect and scientifically research the songs and the melodies of the Lithuanian people, and he promoted them in the Königsberg academic community and abroad. Reza started collecting Lithuanian singing heritage after he completed his studies. The extensive Lithuanian movement that he started did not die, even after he did. Reza grew up in a Lithuanian Curonian environment, received a German education and upbringing, and did not lack Prussian patriotism. But in his autobiography, he wrote that he was from a Lithuanian family line. Martynas Liudvikas Gediminas Reza was born in Karvaičiai, a village not far from Juodkrante, that was later swallowed by a sand dune. His father was a shore supervisor and innkeeper, and his mother took care of their large family at home. Liudvikas was only 4 when his mother died, and his father died a couple of years later. The boy was taken in by Christian David Wittig, a pastor who worked on the other shore of the lagoon, in the village of Kolkėnai, which was inhabited exclusively by Prussian Lithuanians. He educated Liudvikas, and later arranged for him to live and study at the Liebknecht Latin Gymnasium in Königsberg. After that, Reza entered the Faculty of Theology at the University of Königsberg, where he studied theology, the principal subject of his studies, as well as ancient and oriental languages, philosophy, history, and rhetoric. While studying, Reza probably visited his guardian, who was then already working as a pastor in Juodkrante. After graduating from university, Reza taught privately for several years and was a chaplain in the army. He had visited many countries and described his experience in his wartime diary, Chaplain's Notes. He defended his dissertation on the interpretation of the morality of the holy books according to Kant in 1807, and published a scientific paper on the first steps of Christianity among Lithuanians 3 years later. That same year, the Lithuanian Bible Society was established thanks to Reza. The Bible prepared by Reza became a standard of the 19th century Lithuanian written language. It defended the rights and prestige of the Lithuanian nation, and sought its equality with the so-called high culture nations. Reza died in Königsberg on 30th of August 1840. It should be noted, Reza wrote, that the songs are dominated by chaste morals and respect for morality and decency. We will not find a single song, even a small one, that goes with indecent hints beyond the limits of decency and modesty. On the contrary, a high moral sensitivity can often be seen in them, which shows the nobleness of the nation's way. Accumulated pain and gentle melancholy envelop these songs in a blissful veil of sadness. Here, love is not an uncontrollable passion, but an uplifting, sacred sense of nature that allows an unspoiled person to feel that something higher and divine lies in this wonderful inclination of the soul. A nation's song is the purest gem of the nation's soul, and if a nation perishes, it often lives on in its songs. Liudvikas Reza is the only writer who was able to witness the authentic spirit of the land, not a momentary impression made on a traveler, the gaze of an outsider, but the unique experience of the person who lived here. The life of Reza himself becomes a text that testifies to the tragic story of Karavanchi. No biographer can avoid telling the story of the sunken village when writing about this Curonian Spit native. At the very moment when the sea of sand was already licking the foundations of the most expensive houses in Karavanchi, Ludvikas Reza was born. Writes Joseph Eret, a scholar of Swiss descent. The researcher first and foremost linked Reza's work with his place of birth, and was the first in Lithuania to analyze the poems dedicated to his homeland, the Senkan village, and the graves of Karvita. Eret writes, he was born to see his fatherland dying, to bury and mourn it. The establishment of the inn prompted the settlement to expand. New roads appeared through the dunes that led to the Juodkrante inn, where people could relax and eat. It was an important point for travelers. In the sandy desert that the Curonian Spit was, in the 17th century, a hotel owner from Tilsit, Eduard Stellmacher, bought a government inn and turned it into a hotel named Kurischerhof, Curonian Courtyard. For a long time, it was the only hotel in Juodkrante. The hotel stood on a hill, a bit away from the shore of the lagoon, next to the old Klaipeda road, which led from Juodkrante toward the sea. Eduard's son Louis continued the family tradition by developing the hotel business. The Louis Baths, one of the first spas in East Prussia, were built on land donated by the Stellmacher family. In the 19th century, Juodkrante was compared to the French Riviera because of its landscape, recreational traditions, and popularity. Through the efforts of shrewd locals, Juodkrante evolved in just a few decades from a small fishing village into a European-level resort whose golden age lasted until the end of World War II. It was famous for its ornate villas, baths and spas, restaurants and shops, as well as for its walking trails in the forest. Holiday resorts were built, forming a neighborhood of luxury villas, including Villa Montbijou, Villa Lorbel, Villa Linnana, Villa Silvana, and Villa Elizabeth. And the ones that have survived to this day are the true centerpiece of Juodkrante. By the 20th century, Juodkrante's infrastructure was on par with those of Europe's best resorts. The hotels and some of the villas had electricity. The hotels had hot water. And Otto Wiesenberg built a shopping area on the coast. Juodkrante was a holiday destination for middle-class members of the European business and academic community. Professor Adalbert Betzenberger, the renowned German philologist, began visiting Juodkrante and spending his summers there in 1881. He was fascinated not only by the nature, but also by the linguistic, historical and ethnographic past of the area. He even bought a summer house in Juodkrante, Villa Lili. Having analyzed various aspects of the Lithuanian language, as well as the Prussian-Lithuanian dialects, and the language of the Curonian Spit fishermen, Professor Betzenberger is considered to be the founder of Baltic philology. Like Reza, he collected folklore and ethnographic material related to this region and documented folk songs. In the first half of the 20th century, Juodkrante was a popular Baltic seaside resort. There were 5 hotels and 20 villas and pensions, and people would also stay in cozy fishermen houses. After 1923, when Juodkrante became a Lithuanian resort, neither its daily life nor the contingent of visitors from Klaipeda, Königsberg and Tilsit changed. Juodkrante was a fairly luxurious resort. It was too expensive for Lithuanian President Antanas Smetona. After the Klaipeda region was annexed by Lithuania, the Juodkrante resort was advertised as a wellness complex. Convalescents, mild rheumatics, and people suffering from respiratory illnesses or stress are advised to stay here. In addition to the sea and the beach, they can use the modern hot tubs, medical baths, and mud, carbon dioxide, steam, and electric baths, wrote the advertising publication Lietuvos Pajūris in 1931. In addition to contemporary recreation infrastructure, the resort offered trips to the dunes around Juodkrante as well as walks around the fishing village. There was an understanding of the influence that the marine climate, the biologically active substances in the air of the ancient forest, and the aesthetic sides have on human health. The forest had over 40 kilometers of walking paths, numerous observation decks and towers, and even a panoramic scenic overlook. A pavilion on the dune, named after Rudolf Werner. Guests would greet the sun in the morning and see it off in the evening. They would watch moose wade in the lagoon, admire the steamers and yachts passing by, and end day listening to chamber music concerts. For those looking for something more boisterous, there were dances at the Kurishev Hof Hotel with Klaipėda Music Theatre Orchestra, and during the interwar period, Danielius Dolskis and Metropolis would occasionally play there as well. During the second half of the 19th century, the development of the settlement was not only contingent on the expansion of the resort, but also on the activities of the Steinte and Becker amber mining company. The company excavated and fitted out a port for sand dredges, Amber Bay. They filled a section of the washed shore with excavated soil, financed the construction of a steamer berth, built an ornate administrative building in the central part of Juodkrante, and donated an organ to the new Juodkrante church. And they gave Juodkrante global visibility, since the amber was exported to countries around the world. The Juodkrante fishing village was also a colorful place. Unfortunately, the rural community that had developed over 100 years in Juodkrante was wiped out by war. The old inhabitants retreated to the west or emigrated there later. In the exhibition at the Lietuvos Reza Cultural Center Museum, a picture of a child with a pipe. Fritz Peleikis grabs your eye. The boy really wanted to be a fisherman like his dad. He found his father's old clogs and a pipe, put on a much too large fisherman's hat, and, without taking off the apron his mother had sewn for him to wear while doing his chores, walked around the village talking to old fishermen.
I'm Fritz Peleikis. I'm already 4. My dad is a fisherman. I'm going to be a fisherman when I grow up too. My dad's clogs and fisherman's hat already fit me, and I found his pipe myself. A real fisherman has to have a pipe. During the daytime, when all work is done, I walk around the village and the coast. I talk to the fishermen about the weather, the wind, and the fish. The old men smile, but they talk to me. My dad gave me a cast net. In the evening, the two of us throw it into the lagoon. In the morning, when he gets back from the lagoon, my dad wakes me up and we go to pull the net out. My net is a good one. There is almost always a big fish mixed with the small ones. It's even bigger than the ones my dad catches. I bring the fish over to the villas and sell it to the gentlefolk. I bring the money home. My dad says I'm a real fisherman, and soon we'll both go fishing in the lagoon. I can't wait.
Almost all of the former villages, or their children who came from Germany or Canada, after the restoration of Lithuania's independence to visit their homeland, would speak warmly about this character. They would also tell about how the Peleikis family commerce worked. The father, on the way back from his morning fishing, would throw one of his larger eels or breams into his son's net, and then the two of them would come back later to pull the net out. Then the child would go to the resort's villas and sell his catch. Upon meeting such a colorful character, many of the holiday makers would overpay substantially. After the war, the Peleikis family ended up in Germany. Fritz Peleikis became a fisherman and fished the Baltic coast his entire life. But the 4-year-old Fritz Peleikis, looking at us from the photograph, was just the son of a fisherman who loved his dad and wanted to be just like him, a Juodkrante fisherman. Juodkrante's brick church is also on the side of the fishing village, where it was built in 1885 to replace the wooden one which had been constructed in a sanctuary of the Old Faith, the Old Oak Wood. Back then, it was written, "On the way to the church, to the right is the parsonage, far from the street, in a large dense garden. A few more surviving oaks with giant crowns stand there. The 600 to 700-year-old rings indicate that they were already growing when the Teutonic Order settled there after baptizing the Prussians. The girth is 3 meters, and the other two closer to the church look even larger." The contemporary landscape of Juodkrante is impossible to imagine without the sculpture exhibition on the Hill of Witches. In addition to his other activities, Wilhelm Storas Vidūnas, the philosopher, writer, musician, cultural figure, and patron of Lithuanianism, tried to bring the tradition of celebrating Rasos, St. John's Eve, back to life, to commemorate the 5-year anniversary of the unification of Lithuania Minor and Lithuania Major. The Freedom Oak was planted on Ievas Hill in Juodkrante, at the suggestion of Vidūnas. The members of the Centras Society of Lithuania Minor planted memorial trees to mark various occasions and beautify their land. They planted the most memorial trees on Rambynas Hill and in Juodkrante on Ievas Hill. Today too, the Hill of Witches is one of the most visited tourist attractions in Juodkrante. Evening of Celebration by the Baltic Sea, 1798. A tired day is already in a hurry to descend to its grave, while a purple cloak spreads over the Baltic, and like the light of torches, sparkles ever so faintly in the Sambia forests. A fisherman sings as he returns to shore, while the small waves chase his light little boat, and the traveller sets off towards the village, where his quiet peace awaits. The night is enveloped in black velvet. The droning choir of birds goes silent, and only on a distant hill along the grove do the sounds of a bellowing herd still echo. Just as soon as the last ray goes out and drowns in the dark breaking of the waves, does the coast awaken to a new life, in gratitude for what the Lord has sent our way. Morning steps through the golden gates, while the chaste breath glows solemnly, and with holy hymns, joyful worshippers walk reverently toward the shrine. Just as a baby, a pope, and a nobleman are equal in the blessing of the Lord, so will we all, large and small, fall asleep when the celebration of life is over. Only when it is illuminated by the brightest light shall the morning of the great celebration finally come, and there, resurrected from a long dream, shall we be greeted by the eternal celebration. You can learn more historical facts by reading the literature used for this audio guide. Juodkrantės kurorto aukso amžius by Nijolė Strakauskaitė. Liudvikas Rėza by Juozas Girdzijauskas. Raganų kalno pasakos and Juodojo kranto žmonės by Aldona Balsevičienė. Jos didenybė Prūsijos karalienė Luizė Mėmelyje by Jovita Saulėnienė. Šiaurės Sahara by Rokas Flick. Liudvikas Rėza by Monika Kutkaitytė. Lietuvininkas Liudvikas Rėza by Tomas Dergėla. Martynas Liudvikas Rėza by Liucija Citavičiūtė. Apie Juodkrantę, Schwarzortą, Prūsijos elito kurortą. Vakarų ekspresas, Parts 1 and 2 by Arūnas Balna and other stories.